Welcome and study with Tanzania Institute of Education.
Hello student, my name is Madam Neema and I'll be presenting an English lesson for Form 4. But before we begin, I would like to ask you some few questions. Have you ever read any storybook? Have you ever read or recited any poem? Yes? Let's remind ourselves. When you were in Form 1 and Form 2, you read a couple of books. You either read The Magic Garden, or Mabala the Farmer, or Howard the Bus Driver, or even Kalulu the Hare. The poems, I remember one, the Freedom Song. Do you remember Freedom Song? We normally used to call it Atieno. Do you remember that poem? Okay. Now, after looking at those things that we read, the poems that we recited, I want to introduce today's lesson. We are going to look at literary works, particularly poetry. But before we go to poetry, we have to understand what are literary works. We say that literary works is any written words that are put in paper, in books, where you can read. It can be a song, a poem, a novel, a play. That is a literary work. When you look at the word poetry, poetry is also a form of literary work. But this literary work, we call them genres. We call them genres. And these are novels and short stories. Another one are plays. And this one is poetry. So in your course, you're going to go through novels and short stories, plays, but today we'll deal with poetry. As I said earlier, poetry is a form of written art. A poet uses a lot of words. He puts them in rhythm. Unlike other genres of literary work, poetry is like songs. When you write a poem, a person can take it and actually sing. Let's have an example of a poem. I wish I had wings. If I had wings, I could fly. But I can't fly because I don't have wings. You can just imagine, because I'm not a good singer, I will not sing. You might even run away if I sing. You can try to put that into a song. In poetry, there are some words that are very important for us to know. And these are the word poem. Also, you have poet. Also, you have a persona. Apart from that, you also have the word stanza. You have the word verse. You have the word mood or tone. you also have the word rhyme. These are very important words in poem. So before we go any further, we have to explore, in short, the meaning of all these words that are very important in poem. So you say a poem is a group of words that is divided into stanzas. And these words are arranged so well by using rhyme. And so, in order for a poet to call this a poem, they have to be arranged that way. Also, we go to the poet. Who is a poet? We say a poet is a person that composes poem. So you compose a poem, then you become a poet. We have persona. I want to read to you something that describes a persona. Who is a persona? Are you ready? Good. Today, I did my share in building the nation. I drove the permanent secretary to an important urgent function. In fact, to a luncheon at the Vic. So when you look at this piece, you find that there is a pronoun I throughout the reading. So a persona is a person or is a voice in the poem. But that voice has to begin or has to be in the first singular person I. If the person does not have, the poem does not have I, then that is not a persona. Maybe it's something else. So a persona, a voice that has a persona has to have I. So today I did my share in building the nation. I drove the permanent secretary to the luncheon. And that is a persona. Another term that is very important in poetry is stanza. In short, we say a stanza is like a paragraph in other form of art. When you write your composition, you have paragraphs. When you read your novel, you have paragraphs. But in poem, we don't call those paragraphs. Instead, we call them stanzas. So when group of lines or verses are put together, that is a stanza. Are we together so far? Good. Now, we come to the verse. Simple, we say a verse is a line in the poem. So in poem, we don't call them lines. We say verse. So we say verse and then the stanza. So within the stanza, there are several verses. So sometimes you'll be asked, how many verses are there in the first stanza? So you just go and count the lines. Good. There is another one, the mood or the tone. The mood describes the feeling you get after you read the poem. Sometimes you read the poem. You feel sad. You feel like either the persona in that poem has been done injustice or is not feeling well. And so when you read the poem, you feel you also don't feel well. Or sometimes some poems, they make people cry. So those are called either the mood or the tone. So when you're asked, what is the mood of the poem? Then you say, no, the mood of the poem is very sad. Or if it's a happy poem, it makes you smile. Then that is a poem that has a very happy mood. But then we have the word rhyme. When things rhyme in the poem, they make the poem musical. And rhyming means the words at the end of each line, they have the same sounds. Normally, poets use this as a way of making a poem interesting, memorable, easy to read. And so that's why they make the words rhyme at the end of each line. So those are some of the things that are very important to know and understand in poems. So far, can you differentiate between what is a poem, who is a poet, the persona, a stanza, a verse, mood, or rhyme? I hope yes. Now, just like any form of art, because remember, at the very beginning, we say poetry is an art. Like any other art, you have things that makes that particular art unique, or that particular trade unique. Take, for example, a carpenter. In order for a carpenter or a person who makes furniture to make sure that this desk or this table stays together and it looks like a desk, there are some tools that this person would use to make them together. Like, remember, these ones were pieces of things before they became a table. So in order for a poem to become a poem, a poet will use what we call poetic devices. Poetic devices. What are poetic devices? We say poetic devices are tools. Poetic devices are tools that a poet uses in order to express his feelings, thoughts, or ideas through the poem. Poetic devices are very important. Remember, poems, unlike any other genre, are very short. You can't write a poem which is very long. It will become boring and people might not even read it if it's not interesting. So normally poems are short and they drive the message home because of the use of tools. So what are some of those poetic devices? The first one is repetition. You know what is repetition? When you go on and on about something, you tell me something, you tell me again, that is repeating. But in poem, we say repetition is very important because a poet is trying to drive a certain message home. Why are they repeating? So we have repetition, but repetition is divided into three kinds of repetition. The first one is refrain. What is refrain? So a refrain is when a poet repeated a phrase or a verse at the end of each stanza. I repeat, refrain happens when a poet decides to repeat a phrase or a verse on each stanza. So if you see phrases are repeated throughout the stanza, then you know this is refrain. Good. Another type of repetition is alliteration. Alliteration. What is alliteration? When a poet uses alliteration, we say that alliteration is when words that follow each other, they have the same sound. For instance, if you say Peter, Piper, picked. Peter Piper picked. So if you say P and then you have P, another P, that is alliteration. They have this consonant sounds have to be in the same line or verse. You can't have Peter here and then the second line, or you have Peter, Anna, and Job, and then you say no, that is alliteration. No. These words have to follow each other, even if they have words between them. Peter is Piper and picked. It doesn't matter. But when you look at them, they follow each other. And that is alliteration. So in some of the poem, you might find some sounds, consonant sounds. They follow each other. The baker baked a big cake. So the baker, B, baked, baked. So you have this ba, ba, ba. And that is an example of alliteration. And then we have another repetition that is assonance. There is a difference between alliteration and assonance. When you look at alliteration, it deals with repetition of consonant sounds. Here we say consonant sounds. You are big. You know what are consonant sounds and what are not consonant sounds. In assonance, we have what we call the repetition of vowels. And this can happen anywhere, in the middle or even at the beginning of letters, but they have to be in one line. So assonance is the repetition of vowel sound in a verse. That's the difference between these two. This is the repetition of consonant sound, but this is the repetition of vowels. I have some few examples. I'm going to read some of this. Not just read. If I say, for example, if I say, honesty is the best policy. Honesty is the best policy. So if somebody asks, can you see any poetic device in the poem? Then you look. I can see some O's here. Honest and policy. Another one can be a stitch in time saves 9. A stitch in time saves 9. Time and 9. They are rhythmical. They have the same sound. Are we together? Great. So this is just an example or one of the poetic repetition. So I have this feeling that sometimes when the students are asked, look for poetic device in the poem. I don't see it. I don't know where it is. I don't see anything. But there are so many things. So you see repetition, you see alliterance, also you see assonance in one of the in the poem that you are given. Good. So that is just one of the poetic devices. The second one is a simile. A simile. What is a simile? We say that a simile is a comparison of two unlike things by the use of words like as or like. As or like. If, for instance, you say, she is like my sister. She is like my sister. So there, like is a poetic device. And also, if you say, she is as cute as a button. She is as cute as a button. So you see the word as, then you know that is a simile. Are we together? It's very important to understand these terms so that when you read the poem, you understand, the poet has used these things, has used these tools to make, to drive the message home. Apart from a simile, we have what we call a metaphor. A metaphor. A metaphor and a simile have the same function, but they look different. We say that a simile makes use of the word as and like, but a metaphor does not. I'll give you an example. If I say, my brother is a black sheep of the family. My brother is a black sheep of the family. Can you imagine? My brother, black at the same time sheep. So my brother is neither black, neither a sheep. But I've used that metaphor in order to drive a message. When you are a black sheep of the family, it means that maybe you live away from home, but also you are not close to your family. So when someone is a black sheep of the family, means you are not close to your family, but does not mean you are black or you are a sheep. Are we together? Great. If I say, my mother is a lioness. My mother is a lioness. Think, when you speak of a lioness, what comes into your mind? Strength. Very protective. Something not to mess with, right? Good. So my mother is a lioness. It means probably my mother is very strong. Or it means my mother is a person that is very protective of her children or family. Right. So that is metaphor. Now, if I ask you, can you tell the difference between a simile and a metaphor? A simile compares things by using the word as and like. Metaphor just goes and say, like, my brother is a black sheep. I hope you get what I mean. Before I go to another poetic device, I'm going to read you something. I'm going to read you something. A very short piece of poem. Then I want you to tell me, what do you think that is? 10 years old. He looks older than 10 and younger than young. and so small as he wriggles, prisoner of his unproportioned body. 10 years old, he looks older than 10, and younger than young, and so small as he wriggles, prisoner of his unproportioned body. What comes into your mind after hearing of that piece? If you close your mind, okay, 10 years old, but doesn't look 10. So small, but he's 10 years old. How can a 10-year-old be that small? So when something forces you to take a mental picture of something, we get another type of image, of poetic device. So our number 4 is imagery. So imagery is a poetic device that requires us to use all our senses in order to understand what the poet is trying to say. So in imagery, you have to use your senses. Your eyes, ears, sometimes even your tongue, in order to taste what the poet is trying to drive home. If a poet uses the word, for example, stench, I say stench, that's a bad smell. But if you say the word smell, you're like, which one? Perfume, food. But if we use a specifically stench, you can even go, because you know stench is a very bad smell. So that is imagery. So those are very few of the poetic devices that are there. Before we continue, I would like us to recap from the very beginning. You have to understand literary works, what are there in literary works, and then you have poetry, which is very important to us, and that poetry is a form of art. Just like any form of art, poetry uses poetic devices. And we have discussed some of those poetic devices. We'll continue with another lesson. But before I leave, I would like you to have some few questions. Can you tell the difference between poetry and other genres? Can you tell the difference between poetry and other genres of literature? But also, I want you to mention the poetic devices you have learned today, and give examples. Good. We are done for today, but we'll continue on the next lesson. For now, say goodbye.